The surly Russian janitor, seemingly the only other New Yorker in a bad mood, rode me up in his dusty elevator in the vast deco building in the West 20s, which was now home to cyber and design concerns that gravitated to its raw spaces and industrial cachet. The kind of place where the freight car and the corridors are both wide enough that you'd never have to get out of your Lexus until you'd parked it on the 14th floor. Book publishing is always portrayed as terribly genteel and literary. Hunter green walls, Morocco-bound volumes, and some old codger in a waistcoat going on about Dear Max Perkins. Worlds away from the reality of drop-ceiling offices with seas of cubicles and mail cart-scarred walls. But the internet companies were co-evolving with the fictionalized idealization of themselves. The way they looked in movies was also the way they looked in real life, much like real-life mobsters, who now behave like the characters in the Godfather films. The large industrial casement windows were masculine with grime, looking out over the rail yards on the open sky of West Side Manhattan. The content providers sat side by side at long metal trestle tables, the kind they use in morgues, providing content. The transparent turquoise bubbles of their IMAX shining like insect eyes. It was a painfully hip dystopia, some Orwellian ministry of malign intent whose sheer stylishness made it a pleasure to be a chic and soulless drone, one's personal freedoms happily abrogated for a Hugo Boss jumpsuit. I was there to interview the founders of a site that was to be the one stop where members of the media might log on to read about themselves and the latest magazine world gossip, schadenfreude-laden items about hefty book advances and who was seen lunching at Michael's, etc. I will stipulate to a certain degree of prejudicial thinking before I even walked in. I expected a bunch of aphoristic, McLuhan-light bourgeois, something to justify the House of Cards business model. But as a reporter, I was their target audience as well as a colleague. I was unprepared to be spoken to like an investor, as if I too were some venture capitalist who goes goggle-eyed and compliant at the mere mention of anything non-numerical. I was being lubed up with snake oil, listening to a bunch of pronouncements that sounded definitive and guru-like on the surface, but which upon examination seemed just plain old wrong. "What makes a story really good and webby," said one, "is, say, we post an item on David Geffen on a Monday, and then one of Geffen's people calls us to correct it. We can have a whole new version up by Tuesday." This was typical dawn of the new millennium denigration of print, which always seemed to lead to the faulty logic that it was not just the delivery system that was outmoded, but such underlying practices as authoritative voice and credibility, fact-checking, editing, and impartiality that needed throwing out as well. It was a stance they both seemed a little old for, frankly, like watching a couple of 45-year-olds in backwards baseball caps on skateboards. In the future, it seems, we would all take our editorial marching orders from the powerful subjects of our stories, and it would be good. Right you are, Mr. Geffen. It was a challenge to sit there and be told that caring about such things as journalistic independence or the desire to keep money's influence at even a show of remove meant one was clinging to old beliefs, a fossil in the making. Now that everything and everyone was palliated by the never-ending flow of revenue, there was no need to get exercised about such things, or about anything, really. We basically take John Seabrook's view that what you have is more important than what you believe. Whether you drive a Cadillac says more about you than if you're a Democrat or a Republican, said one, invoking a print journalist from the New Yorker. Added the other, that you watched The Sopranos last night is more important than who you voted for. They weren't saying anything terribly incendiary. It's not like they were proposing tattooing people who have HIV the way odious William F. Buckley did. I'm sorry. I meant brilliant and courtly. Such manners, and what a vocabulary. Nazi. But we had just been through an electoral experience that had been bruising, to say the least. Who one voted for had almost never seemed more important. And they were saying it all so blithely. I felt like a wife who has caught her tobacco and gin-scented husband smeared in lipstick, a pair of silk panties sticking out of his jacket pocket, home after an unexplained 3-day absence, listening to his giggling, sloppily improbable and casually delivered alibi, and being expected to swallow it while chuckling along. We were silent for a moment. the only sound the keyboard tappings of the hipster minions. I finally managed to say, "I've just experienced the death of hope." We all three laughed, me in despair, them all the way to the bank. Said one of them, "No, David, we are the very opposite. This is the birth of hope." Down in the rattling freight elevator, I couldn't face going home just then, where I would have to immediately relive this conversation by transcribing my tape. I turned right out of the building, crossed 11th Avenue, and sat on a concrete barrier facing the river. The cynicism of the interview, the lack of belief, coupled with the enthusiastic tone in which the bullshit was being slung, the raiding the granary's greed dressed up in the cheap drag of some hollow dream of a bright new day of it all. The Hudson bleared and wobbled before my eyes, which were swimming with furious tears. I wasn't angry to the point of almost crying because they were wrong, but because they were right.